The future isn't an abstraction anymore. It's something that merges with the nowness of our time. A time that we now love to refer to as Anthropocene, as if we just realized how intricate our own lives were, being fundamentally intertwined not only with nature, but also with all the technologies, architecture, texts, data, synthetic drugs that surround us and literally define who we are. What was once science fiction is now reality, and the real question to ask ourselves today seems to be, is being human mean something anymore? And if so, who holds the key to its definition? Mindful of the urgency of deconstructing the binary thinking that keeps women, men, nature, culture, and other dichotomies alive and themselves traversed by the technologization of the body, hormone use, cosmetic surgery, prostheses, sexual apparatus, reproductive technologies. Many trans, queer, and non-binary people find themselves at the heart of a reflection about the nature of human nature. Their radical and subversive stance regarding technologized bodies blurs the point of intelligibility of a natural body, refuting its claim to autonomy from the technological world. This naturally redefines the changing boundaries between the self and the machine, the animate and the inanimate, the controller and the controlled. How we relate to our environment, to politics, and to our own physicality is changing deeply as we race to virtualize and reinvent our body. The democratization of technologies, ranging from robotic limbs to mixed realities, coupled with the progress of 3D modeling, are suggesting the possibilities of a human body that is editable, customizable, and open source. But at what cost? And for what kind of human body? Without any surprises, the computational world is profoundly straight. Binarisms are at the core of its definition. Computers being made of zeros and ones, of strict protocols ruled by normalcy, legibility, and capability. So no wonder why trans and queer people found themselves very critical of it. Computational technologies are fundamentally heteronormative, and if we don't queer them in the first place, it could just be as harmful as any other straight narrative. While quite short, the history of computing says a lot about its inherent gender bias, transphobia, and overall violent heteronormative matrix. Given the Internet's origin in the Department of Defense, it's no surprise to see control, surveillance, toxic masculinity, and colonialism being at the core of the computational world. Always on their guard regarding new structures of power, feminists were among the first to raise suspicion about the supposed gender neutrality of computational technologies, such as the Internet. Starting in the 70s to eventually be theorized by the 90s, cyberfeminism isn't a philosophical, political, or theoretical movement per se, but a hybrid beast regrouping scholar, historian, artists, porn actresses, scientists, and geek feminists around a tactical set of theories, debates, and practices relating to gender and digital culture. While far from agreeing on its definition, cyberfeminists share a belief that women should attempt to empower themselves via the appropriation and control of computational technologies in ways that continue to express their identities as women. Donna Haraway, while maybe the most influential figure of cyberfeminism with her cyborg counterpart, isn't the only important theorist within the movement, sharing with artists, philosophers, and activists a palpable enthusiasm for technologies. Excited to be at last in control of the narrative, cyberfeminists grasp the web of possibilities and utopias that at times seems to gape the cyberspace. But at the turn of the 20th century, and following feminism's evolution to a more inclusive and intersectional field, now known as queer studies, cyberfeminism, while not dead, mingled with what we can call today queer digital humanities. The utopian and freeing possibilities of computational technologies, as praised by the cyber-feminists of the 80s, has been challenged by the downsides of network technologies: surveillance, sexual harassment through social media, invasion of privacy, data capitalism, etc. Internet isn't a safe space anymore, and queer identities, just as any product sold on Amazon, is a bundle of data that can be sold. Queer digital humanities is binding together the critical stance regarding computational technologies and the sociological tools of humanities. And as for the empowering use of the word queer itself, queer will subvert technologies in queer ways. During the last decade, and bringing trans desire, rights, and visibility in the forefront of this concern, trans digital studies dealt with computational technologies and trans identity. This interdisciplinary subfield is concerned with the many ways trans people use the internet and other computational technologies for their identity and community building practices. Especially interested by artificial intelligence, AI, and their impact on trans identity and rights, trans studies show alarming statistics. Studies from 2019 found that in academia only, 18% of authors at leading AI conferences were women, while more than 80% of AI professors were men. This disparity is extreme in the AI industry itself. For example, women comprise only 15% of AI research staff at Facebook and 10% at Google. For Black workers, the picture is even worse. For example, only 2.5% of Google workforce is Black, while Facebook and Microsoft are each at 4%. And for trans and queer workers, there's no picture at all. Some would argue that this comes as no surprise, given the shy willingness of the government to recognize and legalize trans identities in the first place. But what may seem by many to be just a problem of M and F on some random identity form has far more consequences. Because those same governments are way more willing to buy and use surveillance software and biometric devices built upon algorithms programmed by all those white cisgender middle-aged American men. It affects, of course, how AI companies work, what products get built, who they are designed to serve, and who benefits from their development. If the empowering capacity of the internet can certainly emphasize the sense of belonging and social support for a large number of marginalized people, power relations that underpin the diversity problem in the computational world are still at play, especially when it comes to AI and the subfield of facial recognition. If the mainstream conversation appears not to have moved beyond the 80s sci-fi vision that placed the attention mainly on the danger of the technology, trans and queer digital artists bring forward more pressing issues such as representation, visibility, and gender bias. The last decade has seen exponential growth in the aesthetic application of AI and machine learning, and those artists are definitely in the process for grounding the cultural, ethical, and social problems that highlight this new digital present that architecture more than ever our body. A critique of the promiscuous invasion of heteronormative biotechnologies on the physical integrity of the bodies is central to the work of queer artist BLAS. A founding member of the artist group Queer Technologies and a scathing critic of neoliberal technocracy, BLAS hijacks the technologies that he denounces in order to debunk their implicit violence. In reference to the peculiar aesthetic of facial recognition software, the project Face Cages is presented as a series of metallic sculptures that take the form of typical biometric identification diagrams. These facial devices, which here tend to suggest object of torture, are then carried around in performances that foreground the violence of such authentication strategies. BLAS dramatize these biometric measurements of the living, materialized as coercive objects that are like the systemic oppression for which they are responsible, literally caging the lives of the trans and queer people in a formatted identity. Far from being merely virtual, facial recognition programs have a direct impact on minorities, as they use mathematical formulas and supposedly unimpeachable psychological assessments to invalidate or confirm the value of already marginalized human lives. For it is them, trans women, Hispanic gays, illegal immigrants, and others such unclassifiable, who are mainly affected by the surveillance and life-regulating system. As its title indicates, face cages truly crystallize the physical violence of these digital technologies. Facial weaponization suite provides another beautiful response to the technocratic abuses linked to political exploitation of biometric data. Taking the form of abstract silicone mask made from physiological data, the series offered the possibility to upset the coercive power of these invasive technologies. Wearing the mask will allow the person whether to be recognizable or not by biometric devices, those apparatus being unable to perform their surveillance duty on such abstract faces. Those masks give an incisive response to a study made in 2014 that tends to demonstrate the existence of decisive or morphological differences between heterosexual and homosexual men. Aside from stigmatizing a community already at risk of suffering physical and social violences, this type of research supports and even encourages discrimination and prejudice, as many studies have shown the sexist and racist bias in the algorithms involved in facial recognition. Luckily, a revolution is unfolding in operating rooms, labs, artists, and designer studios across the planet. The idea that we should merge with computers to expand our intelligence and extend life is gaining traction. Medical, scientific, and technological frontiers are pushed to redefine the human body through AI, biotech, or genetics. Hand in hand, scientists, geeks, artists, and housewives are on a quest to unlock the secrets of human nature, finding through implantable technology, algorithms, and DIY hormones new bodies of work. Not content to reveal the performativity of AI in and on bodies, in and offline, artists such as BLAS and so many more propose to reappropriate the political, cultural, and especially digital processes through which the body, as technique, acquires natural status and market value. From Jack Elwes' dystopic ZIZI project that aims to explore machine learning's blind spot and drag queen performances, to Andie Shabbar QueerAltDelete project that locates glitch art as a critical and creative mode of protest against cisgender surveillance, artists are queering the computational world, diffracting the possibilities to take back their agency. The subjectivities of the trans and queer artists who have a privileged perspective on the fringes of dominant systems are therefore in the right place, resisting the technocratic regimes that now mold our contemporaneity. In the same way women artists in the 70s turned to videos as a new medium for resistance in a history of art made of masters, geniuses, and Greenbergian darlings, maybe trans and queer people can reclaim the digital world as theirs putting the table for a more inclusive and benevolent future.